in, I'll stop and explain to him then. Okay. Right. Good morning, all. And can I, in the first instance, welcome you all. We'll go through the formal part of the agenda. Then I'll do some introductions. Apologies for absence.
We have apologies for absence from Bridget Rowlands, Irene Mann and Mandy Evans, and Cabinet Member David Hopkins is unable to attend as well.
Yeah. Item 2 is the disclosures of personal prejudice interest, which is any of the members or officers have interest in any of the companies that we're discussing with today, they should declare that. And to the best of my knowledge, there has been no declarations. And again, just for the business people to understand this, we have, because this is a scrutiny board, there's a probation on the whip votes. And if there is been a party decision to do a vote, we need to understand that. And normally there is none, and everybody has that understanding that in scrutiny there are no whip votes, but we have to put it in as a legal issue. Item 4 are the minutes, but prior to that, I'd like to introduce the committee here, or the panel here, to all of the people that are visiting. Can we start off? Michelle, would you like to start?
Yes, my name's Michelle Roberts and I'm the Scrutiny Support Officer.
Okay, Peter Jones. I think he's having issues with his computer, so we'll come back to him. Lyndon?
Yeah, Lyndon Jones, Councillor in Bishopston.
Councillor Mike White?
Yeah, I'm Councillor Mike White and represent the Landor ward.
Councillor Jeff Jones?
Yes, Councillor Jeff Jones, Kirray South.
Councillor Hazel Morris?
I'm Hazel Morris from Canderry Ward.
Phil Downing?
Yeah, I'm Phil Downing, Councillor for Pontypridd.
Chris Williams? Chris?
Sorry about that. Chris Williams. I work for the council. I'm head of commercial services and I cover procurement.
Okay, my name's Chris Holly. I'm councillor for Cumbulla Ward and I am the convener of this panel. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, Rhys.
Rhys Morgan, I'm a key account manager for public sector for LBS Builders Merchants.
Mark Thomas.
Yeah, morning all. My name is Mark Thomas. I work for Days Fleet. I deal with public sector acquisition of contracts.
Amanda.
Hello everybody, I'm Amanda Carr, the Director of SCBS, Swansea Council for Voluntary Service, and I have to apologise, I'm having some bandwidth issues today, so we'll likely need to keep my camera off.
Okay, Christopher Parker was here earlier on. I'm not sure where he's disappeared to.
Yep, I just turned the camera off. Good morning, everybody. I work for Computer Centre as Public Sector Account Manager for Wales. Okay, thank you all. And again, as I say, if Mr. Wayne Harris joins us, I will explain the process to him. Now, the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the response to the follow-up questions. Now, we won't bore you with going through all the minutes. We've been through all the minutes, and there's a response to one question which we asked, Councillor Peter Jones asked with regards to environment issues about and how we discussed that with the people that one of them is not here now, is Wayne Thomas, about the home to school transport team. So that's where we are with that item. Then we have on the next item on the agenda is public questions. Fun? Who's that? Oh, Peter, are you back with us?
Chris.
Peter, can you introduce yourself, please?
Cut off. I may get cut off again, and apologies if it happens. But the panel question concerning contracts with transport companies and the risks of air pollution from idling vehicles and so forth, particularly outside schools, I am still concerned. I'm happy with the response we've received, But the fact of the matter is, and I can speak from direct personal experience, coach companies are still idling their vehicles outside their schools for considerably longer periods than the 2 minutes referred to in the official response. There's a continuing problem there, and this is not the time to discuss it, but it needs to be looked at elsewhere. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Peter Jones is the councillor for the Scrutiny ward. Now then, we move on to public questions, and we assured there are none today. So we go straight on to the roundtable discussion. We have sent out a number of questions, 5 questions to you. And what we'd like to do is for each one of you to give us a couple of minutes and what your view is on each one of the questions. What I tend to do is go through the first question and ask for your views on that, and then the second, third, fourth and fifth. And then if any members got any questions in between, if they put their virtual hands up, then we'll get back to them. Okay, and the first question is, what's your experience of the procurement process in Swansea, positive and or negative? Rhys, your LBS?
Yeah, so LBS are a family-owned builders merchants trading since 1931. We supply sort of building materials, roofing materials, plumbing, heating, kitchens, anything really towards the council's direct operatives. No issues our side really. We supply materials via different frameworks that we've been awarded. So it could be building products, could be plumbing, heating materials, could be roofing. Anything then such as external wall insulation that we're not currently that we haven't been awarded because we weren't successful in the tender bid, then we're unable to supply unless one of the incumbent suppliers are struggling for material or struggling on service. So generally everything's fine. You know, we've got a good working relationship with the procurement team at City of Swansea and Cumbola there. Daily dialogue with them, and no serious concerns, no issues from our point of view. I don't think at this time.
Thank you, Mark Thomas, Days Fleet.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I would say likewise with Rhys, a lot of the procurement of vehicles is done via frameworks, of which we're a member of a number of the national frameworks. And so the guidance and governance given by the frameworks is how the procurement strategy is adhered to via Swansea Council. At the moment, vehicles are being procured via the National Procurement Services for Wales framework, NPS. And again, there are no issues from what I can see. We've been providing vehicles to City and County Swansea for well over 20 years now. And whichever framework strategy the council decide to operate under, we're able to facilitate and supply vehicles through. And again, to echo what Rhys says, we have a strong relationship with the fleet management team, in particular Mark Barrow, who we speak to probably a couple of times a week.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Can I ask Amanda Carr for her views?
Yes, thank you. I guess we're in a slightly different position perhaps to other people speaking today. And I guess it's important to understand that probably the evidence that I'm giving is Amanda wearing 2 hats, one as SCVS, because we do hold some contracts directly with the local authority, but also SCVS in its role of representing and supporting the third sector more broadly. So I guess I need to distinguish some of the comments slightly and describe which hat I'm wearing. So in terms of SCVS and its direct relationship with the council, I think we have really positive relationships around procurement, increasingly positive actually over the years as relationships are built. I think that because a lot of the contracting that's done with the third sector is around health, social care, well-being and community-based services. So it perhaps looks a little bit different to framework agreements or, you know, contracts for stuff, for want of a better word. because it is sort of, you know, in the personal services space. In terms of the sector as a whole, I would like to comment on the third sector strategy arrangements between the local authority and the sector, and the compact that exists. And that over the past 18 months particularly has become a really strong forum for the third sector to be able to discuss concerns or issues directly with procurement colleagues. And that's been a really positive way of building those relationships. And I think something that I would again praise the local authority for in this space, particularly over the last 2 to 3 years, is the growing emphasis on co-production around specifications for services which are going to be sought from the third sector, and procurement colleagues being really on board in working in a co-productive space to the extent that the law will allow. So yeah, I think some generally, particularly more recently, very positive experiences.
Okay, thank you very much. Christopher Parker.
Yes, good morning. I work for Computer Centre. We're the UK's largest IT reseller. So we supply IT infrastructure and digital transformation to customers. So my experience of working with Swansea is generally positive. I do have a few things which I can outline perhaps later on in some of your other questions, but generally yes, it's a positive experience.
Okay, can I have a question from one of the members, Jeff Jones, Councillor Jeff Jones?
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for a bit of a background on your roles on the business and so on. With regards to actually, shall we say, getting into the local authority on the suppliers list in the first instance, how easy was that, and how did you actually attempt to get in the first place? Was it through a personal contact, or was it a meet to buy a session or whatever, or a tender exercise? How did you actually initially get in?
Can we do it the other way around then, Christopher Parker?
So most public sector business is done via frameworks. So we apply to get on the NPS framework, which is the Welsh Government-backed framework for technology, and that gives us access then to all the public sector across Wales. But there are, in addition to that, perhaps another 6 or 7 frameworks used, which we also sit on. So that's basically the entry into Swansea. Although recently Swansea seemed to have gone away from frameworks and now use an ODU process, which is an open process. So any supplier can tender for the business. There are some questions and issues around that process.
Okay, then can we talk, Amanda, can we have your view?
Yeah, I think the entry point, certainly both for SCVS and the sector more generally, is that we're constantly keeping our eye out for tenders, Sell to Wales and the like. We're not on frameworks. It doesn't work like that for the things that the third sector are likely to want to bid for. So it is constantly waiting for alerts to come in and searching to see if it's something that sector organisations might think fits within their remit. It's certainly not anything about personal relationships, although I have to say that again, within where perhaps a third sector service has previously existed under a grant or an SLA arrangement and is then having to become a procured arrangement, the previous contract leads would let the organisation concerned know that their contract is ending, but that it is going to end up being procured, and to keep an eye out. So there is at least a heads up in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Mark Thomas.
So we may be a little bit different on this point because our entry point into supply for Swansea City Council occurred during the late 80s. As a locally based dealer network in the Swansea City area, we originally, part of the leasing company that I sit in was born out of supplying lease vehicles on contract hire to Swansea City Council. As vehicle leasing became a more pertinent procurement strategy for councils. But more recently, and to echo what Christopher said earlier, we also sit on the many public sector frameworks that the public sector have access to for procurement strategy. And at the moment, City and County of Swansea use NPS, National Procurement Services for Wales, of which we are a successful supplier. And so all of the vehicles that are procured on contract hire, certainly over the last 24 months, have been done via the National Procurement Services for Wales framework. And we're governed by the call-off documents that's supplied by the framework provider in that instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, Tom Holland.
Yeah, just to issue what Christopher and Mark said, really, just very similar experiences our end. We sort of applied via National Procurement Service, NPS, Welsh Government frameworks to tender for materials for Swansea City Council. Over the last 2 or 3 years, building material-wise, Swansea, as to echo Christopher's comments there, they pulled away from the National Procurement Service framework, so tender via OJU. We have seen recent examples of where there's been a door framework, internal doors for new build sites where, to echo Christopher there, we've seen companies from sort of Dorset and Scotland tendering for and bidding for work. That's probably a bit of a, might be seen as a bit of a sore subject, but you know, obviously with the OJU agreement that has to sort of apply. Yeah, not too sure fully. I'm not really asked the question why Swansea pulled away from the National Procurement Service on the building materials framework, but basically anything that comes out on tender on Centre Wales, we have a look at it and decide whether we can bid for it or have the capabilities to be able to supply. No concerns and no issues really. Just just to echo much of what the other gentlemen have said in the last few minutes.
I think Chris is frozen now.
Yeah, he has a bit, isn't he? Just sat there thinking of it. What's going on here?
Do you want me to come in there till Chris can come back?
Yeah, could you, Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, can we go on to the second question, and please? Rhys, if you want to lead on that. Do you believe that the council's procurement processes and systems are efficient, transparent, and consistently applied?
From a time scale here at LBS, I've been here since January 2020, so not a long period of time, considering we've had a considerable amount of downturn in sales due to operatives not being allowed to work in your tenants' properties. I think everything's been sort of fair and above board as far as I can see, and in my opinion, yes, Mike, yeah, there's not been any issues or any concerns in my head.
Okay. Yeah, I think Chris is back now.
Yeah, that's for all of a sudden it just dropped out. Thank you, Mike, for taking over. I do appreciate it. The next question, I think, is: do you believe that the council's procurement processes and systems are effective, transparent, and consistently applied?
Chair, can I just say we just kicked on that one while you were closing out.
Right.
So
okay.
Rhys already responded, so we need to.
Or Mark next, is it?
Yeah. I'll take that then, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely do believe that this is an efficient procurement process. For my part, again, to echo the points that we've raised, the procurement process follows the tender framework providers procurement strategy of any of the given frameworks that we operate under. And as mentioned, this is Swansea City Council, currently procure their vehicles via National Procurement Services for Wales. So yeah, the systems that are there to be used, the publication of the tenders done via Sell to Wales, I think Rhys touched on that earlier. So from a transparency and a consistency point of view, that web hosted portal provides consistency for how the tender process is started, and then obviously scoring and call-off document is done in assistance with National Procurement Services for Wales. So I don't see any issues in the processes that are applied at the moment.
Thank you very much. Amanda?
I think in terms of SCBS, my experience of it is that the processes are efficient. In terms of the sector, I think the sector, many of whom go nowhere near tendering because they're just way too little, just cannot get involved for a whole range of reasons. Probably the efficiency might be a little bit in question there, because it's not about the efficiency so much as the bureaucracy and the scale of services that many small organisations want to offer within the council area, but they're not big enough or able to scale up enough to be able to work in that way. And that, as I say, the whole bureaucracy is not just about the council; it is about the law. It's about the process. I think in terms of transparency and consistently applied, that has been more tricky for the sector over the past few years, which I don't blame the procurement process itself. It is that move away from historic grant giving or service level agreement arrangements into a procured process. And quite often organisations have been unable to really understand why that might be happening when their service has always apparently performed very well or been really valued. And then they feel like they're being kind of excluded because they just, it is too bureaucratic for them. I think probably part of that is about people moving their thinking to a new world of procurement, accepting that that is what they have to kind of learn to be able to do. And that certainly is something that SCBS over the past few years has had a focus on supporting people. So rather than supporting people to apply for grants, supporting people to submit tenders. So I think it's not so much about the council particularly, it's about the organisations as well. So it's being on a journey together, hopefully, so that transparency and consistency and understanding and communications around that, so that everyone arrives in the same place and understands why that's happening. But I do think there are issues then sometimes around transparency or consistency where there are still council grants and other things that are procured, and it can be really, really difficult for people to understand why in some circumstances they are still applying for grants and in others they have to look at procured services. So as I said at the beginning, it's something that I believe that the third sector compact arrangements, it's a key area of work for us in moving on so that we are all on the same page and in a consistent, transparent place. But there remain those examples that sort of challenge it really, and why sometimes decisions are made that things are grant giving and other times people find it hard to understand why it has to be procured.
Well, I think we might have lost Chris again. Have we?
Go on, Mike.
Yeah, well, who's the next gentleman? Is it Mark?
It was Chris next, I believe.
Chris.
I've covered that point.
Hi.
Sorry, Chris.
So the question is, do I believe the council's procurement processes are efficient? I guess I'd like to touch upon why Swansea Council have moved away from using the framework that was put in place by Welsh Government and have now gone down the OJU route. The benefits of using a framework is that they're supposed to reduce the overall procurement costs and the use of internal resource. And it helps to build long-term relationships between suppliers and buyers. If you go down the OJU route, then it's an open invitation for literally every man and his dog to put in a response. If we're on a framework, we have to go through various hoops to get on frameworks. So we have to prove that we've got all the ISO accreditations in place. We have to prove that we're financially viable and that we've got the competence and technical accreditations in place. If you go on the OJU route, you have to do all of those background checks yourself. So my experience of working in public sector, and I only work in public sector in Wales, is that 90% of customers I see will use frameworks. So I would be interested to know why Swansea have decided to move away from doing that.
I don't know if it's apt, Mike, for Chris Williams.
Yeah, Chris, I'm just going to call in Chris now. Chris, are you able to respond to the question from...
I think with regard to the National Procurement Service, there was an announcement some time ago by the Welsh Minister that they were going to end that vehicle for collaborative contracts. That hasn't, in a sense, happened, and it has gone through some form of reform and reshaping. So that may have led the ground for consideration. But I guess listening to this, and I'd have to, go back and develop a formal response, I think would be best, because a number of people would have been involved in the decision making. But it sounds like we've gone down a route of increasing competition through that process by, as Christopher said, going out to a wider market. Now we'd have to, I'd like to review that again and just double check that. But that sounds like the strategy there for this. That often we do in a commodity-based situation. And I'm assuming, Christopher, this is for things like the supply of laptops, is it?
I mean, not necessarily laptops, but software, anything. I only deal with IT-related products, so it can be anything IT-related, basically.
But we would use frameworks for certain software products. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, I guess. We'd have looked at what the best solution is. But, I'm interested in Christopher's comments and happy to look at this particular item further. The only thing I'd say as well is that frameworks are OJU processes. What we're talking about here is whether we run it or we use another body's one, and they would have taken the usual sort of commercial value for money and other impact considerations in it, and look for the best fit for Swansea. So there's generally not one size fits all, and the process would have been gone through and said, well, let's try this version. But I'd be interested to see, having experienced that, whether people are interested in reverting to other routes in future, having compared the two processes. But I think the important thing to me, going from the transparency point of view, is we would have published this opportunity. As Christopher said, companies would have been encouraged to apply, but it's to get further into the layers of that, and I can come back to that if it's okay.
Is that okay, Chris, that Mr. Williams goes back and sends you a formal response on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Okay. I think there's more work involved going through the OJU process, because you've got to sieve through absolutely every person that responds. So that's the whole point of a framework. And as a company, we invest a lot of money to get on frameworks, to get access to customers like yourself. But if people aren't using the frameworks, then it makes it a bit of a waste of time, if I'm honest. But yeah, if you could respond formally, then that would be great, Chris. Thank you.
Okay. Well, okay. I think the chair's back in again now.
Thanks, Mike. I do apologise to you all. It just seems to be falling in and out all the time. Item 3 is have you experienced any barriers to accessing procurement? If you could give your experiences on that, Rhys.
Fair to say, Chris, no issues at all, really. Everything's been sort of above board. Where there has been a bit of a grey area, it's been explained and detailed to us quite thoroughly by the operatives or the personnel in the city of Swansea. So no issues or examples at our end at this time. No.
Okay, Mark.
The only barrier we had wasn't as a direct result of anything that Swansea Council were doing, but a few years ago, Swansea were using National Procurement Services for Wales to supply vehicles, the framework to supply their vehicles. And National Procurement Services for Wales, in their wisdom, were piggybacking their vehicle framework on the back of Crown Commercial Services, which is a larger framework that covers the whole of the UK. And at that time, the two largest leasing companies in Wales were not part of Crown Commercial Services. And so all vehicle procurement for the City and County of Swansea was being supplied for about a 6-month basis outside of Wales. During that time, we and the other leasing company in Wales were lobbying the First Minister to try and force the hand of National Procurement Services to run their own standalone vehicle procurement framework, which we were successful in doing. And then I think, as Christopher mentioned, we had to jump through the various hoops and tender process of applying to be a supplier on the National Procurement Services framework in order to be successful and supply vehicles into Swansea City Council again. So I think you all agree that seems like a level of madness in that period. But like I said, it wasn't a direct result of anything that the City and County of Swansea were doing. City and County of Swansea were utilising the national framework for procurement in Wales, which I believe is the best strategy for procuring vehicles in this instance. It just transpired that they were piggybacking on Crown Commercial Services, and the Welsh-based suppliers at that time weren't on Crown Commercial Services. Subsequently, both of the large leasing companies in Wales applied and were successful in becoming suppliers to Crown Commercial Services, as National Procurement Services launched their own standalone framework. So a lot of work went on in the background to in order us to supply, but fortunately now, whichever strategy is deployed, both of the large leasing companies in Wales are able to supply the council.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an area where there are probably significant issues for the sector, some of which I've already briefly touched on. Where do I start? I think that, because again, we're talking services to people rather than goods, so we're talking services rather than goods, sorry. I think I've mentioned already that a lot of third sector organisations within Swansea are relatively small, and they're delivering very localised services to communities and to people within communities. That can make it really difficult for organisations to access procurement opportunities. Quite often they won't have apparently everything in place that you have to tick the box for in terms of, you know, background checks or stuff, which isn't to say that they're not fit to run the service. It's quite often that the questions asked in a procurement process are not actually the right ones for this type of service, and that can be really challenging. I think that it's really important, again, in order to ensure that local organisations, rather than large national organisations, are able to apply, that there is thinking involved in putting the procurement exercise together, that looks at social benefit, looks at social value, looks at the local need. And we've had some really good examples of working with procurement to put some of those sorts of clauses in to try and enable more locally based organisations to apply. and therefore kind of, you know, get involved in that circular economy stuff as well. We do have examples where, you know, and other colleagues in the room, you know, in the more commercial field have touched on this, about any organisation can apply. Well, you know, a lot of third sector procurement has been based on, as I've said before, organisations that have already been delivering their own service being put out to tender, and then big organisations that might be UK based applying to deliver that. I think that the sector, there have been examples that have been reported to me, and the conversations have been had with the local authority as well, that there are issues around the scoring assessment, and value for money really doesn't sit comfortably as the main scoring criteria for services to people. So those other things, the social benefit, the social value, the localism, they're really important in enabling the third sector to access procurement opportunities. But where it's a service that is already being delivered by a third sector organisation that is then moving from an SLA situation to a tender position, organisations have reported that the total contract value is basically, appears to be based on value for money, but actually driving down costs. Unviable for the third sector organisation. If they go for it, they're basically being asked to subsidise what would otherwise be council run.
Oh, I think, Amanda, we're having some problems with your
yeah. I think we got the gist of what Amanda's saying, though, because of the size of the organisations involved, isn't it?
Oh, a minute, we're getting some more info.
That I could point you in the direction.
Can you hear us, Amanda?
She's frozen up again. Okay, shall we go on to Christopher?
But we can come back to Amanda.
Yeah. Christopher?
Hi. Yeah, in terms of barriers and accessing procurement processes, I have no issues in that area at all. So we can either go through the frameworks or the OJU process, but absolutely no problems there at all.
Okay. Amanda, can you come back? Okay. Right. I think item 4. Amanda's actually answered item 4, the question 4, and it appears that none of the other either Christopher, Mark or Reese have an issue with item 4, because that's already been discussed at some length.
Can I just say one thing on that point, Chris? That I think we've all mentioned frameworks a number of times here, and I think probably at the moment it seems like the procurement strategy for Swansea is to utilise national procurement services for Wales across the board. There are a number of other frameworks, excuse me, that operate nationally. That, in my experience, can advise the successful bidder to utilise local supply chain. So just because National Procurement Services for Wales is a Welsh-based framework, as a leasing company, there are, multinational banks who are on National Procurement Services for Wales. There are multinational leasing companies that are on National Procurement Services for Wales. And if I can talk about my experience, I operate across the whole of the UK. And for example, I fund vehicles in Scotland where the authority will request us to procure and supply the vehicles we're successful in being awarded via a locally based dealer. So I think that's probably something to keep in mind, just because National Procurement Services for Wales is a Welsh-based framework. The winning bidder isn't necessarily a Welsh-based company and are not always guided to procure vehicles via locally based suppliers. If I can use an example outside of this, recently there was a contract award in North Wales via National Procurement Services for Wales that I'm aware of. Vehicles were supplied via a dealer group in Liverpool, and so then the Welsh-based pound is not kept in Wales because the guidance wasn't to utilise a local dealer group.
Okay. Actually, that's very interesting, because that brings up the subject which we will discuss at another time, about how we set up some of our contracts. Okay, then as Amanda can pop on.
Sorry, I think Amanda's back, I think.
Oh, right, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I feel like I want to ask the computer expert in the room if the weather does impact your your signal, because yeah, the thunder, just everything seemed to go dead. So I don't know whether it's right to blame the weather or not. Chris, I'm not sure what you heard and whether you want me to comment on anything in particular.
Well, I think what we've heard is, and effectively from you, and actually Mark just brought up something about how more we should be looking more locally and actually look at a better experience for smaller organisations within Wales and within the process of procurement. And one of the things that he just told us about was a lease that was done in North Wales, whereas the company that got hold of the lease on the national framework was from Liverpool, so the Welsh pound left Wales effectively. And what you've been saying in your assessment of access to the procurement in Swansea is very much smaller organisations find it a great burden to actually come on board with any sort of framework, because of the amount of work and the amount of effort required and the expertise to get onto those type of frameworks. And also because of social services, it's about people, not a product. So I think those are the things that we've learned from what you've been saying.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that sort of localism is really important across all services. And I suppose I'd just like to cite the beyond bricks and mortar approach as something that, you know, I've always wanted to see that those like kind of local social benefit clauses, you know, spread more widely across tendering. When I talk about small organisations, I would consider SCBS a small organisation in the scheme of definitions of SMEs. So when I'm talking about very small organisations in Swansea, you know, it is also very difficult for an organisation of the size of SCBS to get involved in procurement as well. So I am not talking just incredibly small, but also, you know, some of the organisations that might be our larger voluntary organisations within Swansea, such as SCBS.
I'm going to move on to the last item, because I think this item, and then I'm going to ask for the recording to be stopped for a while. Given your experience working with Swansea Council, is there any element of the procurement process you would like to see changed? I think there's one or two issues. Shall we start with Christopher Parker?
I don't think not fundamentally changed, no, apart from, you know, the framework thing, more emphasis on that. I mean, we sign up as a company to work with the Future Generations Act and Prosperity for All, which is a Welsh Government policy, which supports inward investment. So we have an office in Cardiff where we invest quite a bit in infrastructure there and employment. And also as part of the access to the framework, we have to commit to things like community benefits, which deliver digital inclusion across the social demographic. So we'll do things like offer refurbished IT to charities and organizations to help make Wales a little bit more equal. But all of that comes under the umbrella of providing IT under a framework.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Amanda?
From my perspective, I think it's about my local authority sort of procurement colleagues and others continuing to engage with the sector really fully. It's about really importantly communication, and it is about, sorry, and this is a bit of a shameless plug for a contract that SCVS currently holds. It is about the support to the third sector to engage with things like the procurement process. So, you know, having that as part of the specification for third sector support funded by the council is really important, because we little groups, they just cannot do this without help. So very much about comms and engagement for me, and keeping up what has been a process of the relationships becoming much better, and people feeling much more confident about being able to raise issues. And again, a bit of a shameless plug, the third sector compact arrangements that the local authority have put in place, because that has given a really important sort of opportunity for third sector organisations to meet directly with procurement colleagues.
Okay. Then Mark, is there anything that you'd like to see changed?
I don't think so. I think for myself, and I understand the tone of Christopher's frustrations, but for myself, the procurement strategy for vehicle leasing at the moment is adhered to and regulated by a framework. Whichever framework that is, in my opinion, the best method for procurement of public sector products or services is done via a framework and the support and governance that the framework offer to the authority. Like I said, there are a number of frameworks that we can supply under across the whole of the UK, National Procurement Services in Wales being one of them, but to name a few others that are very, very good at what they do, I would say Crown Commercial Services, the Procurement Partnership Limited and Link are extremely good at what they do, and the support and guidance that they can offer to their members. I mentioned earlier Mark Barrow, who is the head of fleet for Swansea City Council, and in Mark you have probably one of the best fleet managers that I deal with across the whole of the UK. Very, very knowledgeable, very experienced, and very good at supplying accurate information to bidders for the type of vehicles that are required, from very small vans right the way through to sweepers and panel vans with lifting equipment and street lighting repair vehicles. You also have somebody who was one of the earliest adopters of electric vehicles. We supplied 40 electric Peugeot partners into Swansea Council probably 6 years ago. So I would say that, you know, we have no issues around what the council do, but would just like to note that, you know, there are a number of methods that these things can be procured under.
Okay, thank you very much. Peter, I'm going to finish with Rhys and then come back to you, okay? Rhys, have you anything you would like?
Yeah, just very interested to see do you hear sort of a lot of Mark's comments there, particularly, and Christopher there as well. Some good points made there. Obviously, being a Welsh-based company with 400+ staff now employed, we do contribute heavily towards the community benefits and the Welsh pound, and sort of a lot of our competitors don't. Only little gripe maybe is that sometimes, you know, we can be perceived as not been the cheapest on the in the market for the products that we supply, but obviously we are contributing towards the local economy with jobs and apprenticeships and such like, and our competitors don't seem to be. So it's very interesting to see to hear what a lot of Mark was saying there, really. But no massive concerns or gripes with me at all there, Chris. So yeah, hopefully that confirms that.
Okay, thank you. Peter, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mark Thomas has addressed the issue that I'm going to raise with his reference to electric vehicles, which is part of the answer to my question. And my question concerns greening and greening of requirements in terms of the procurement process. Everyone is probably aware that Swansea Council is committed to a net zero emissions target by 2030, and for Swansea as a whole by 2050. And bearing in mind, of course, with COP26 about to commence, and the increasing focus on climate change and other greening issues to do with the natural environment, what would the business representatives feel about Swansea writing greening formally into a procurement requirement, and how would they address that in terms of their respective interests? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Parker, Christopher Parker.
I think actually it is already built into the tender process for IT. So there's all sorts of Energy Star standards which are giving ratings, and that forms part of the scoring assessment of the product. So I think it's covered already.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, I would echo that we do already sort of answer in any tenders on our internal organisational approach. I would really support Councillor Jones' point on, I think it is absolutely important, even more timely than ever, that this is addressed through procurement insofar as it can be. I think we all have a responsibility, talking from my organisation's perspective, to do more than we're doing already. There are some things from a third sector perspective that I would like to see coming through procurement. I think support for community transport schemes, picking up on, the council already, being heavily involved in transport, but starting to look at how third sector can play a more important part in that. That's really pertinent for me at the moment as an organisation that has been working with the local authority and the health board over the last year, since January, to enable people with no access to transport to get to vaccination centres, to uptake COVID vaccinations that they would otherwise be entirely unable to access, though willing and desperate to do so. So it's become in sharp relief to me that many communities are so lacking in transport, be it private or public, and really having some focus on community transport. And sorry, I sound like I'm probably going off the point, but in that context, focusing on electric vehicles, but also importantly, electric charging points and how those can be built into communities, particularly more rural, isolated communities, to make that more of a reality. And actually, in terms of procurement, sitting here with Mark in the room, why are we not pushing for procurement that is consortia procurement across different partners, so that we're getting the best out of what we're all able to offer? I would love to work with Mark on something that supported community transport schemes using, Day's immense sort of experience and the fleet manager that you've mentioned's experience. Why can we not be coming up with some really localised solutions that involve public, private, third sector expertise in one place, that delivers better on this particular agenda? Sorry, that was a bit of a off the point, but really pertinent, Councillor Jones, in terms of some of the work we're doing in the third sector at the moment around transport within communities.
Okay, I'll take Rhys Morgan first, because I'll leave it till Mark, because Mark is directly concerned with the green vehicles, which we've been talking about. Rhys?
To be fair, obviously with the carbon net zero sort of criteria that we've all businesses have got to hit, and all local authorities and councils and housing associations have got to be looking towards imminently, if they're not already. Swansea are pretty good with new build homes being built in the city at the minute. Very efficient solar panels, Tesla batteries, car charging points outside of the front of the house, so future-proofing, so to speak. That's good to see and it's pleasing to see. Obviously, I deal with a lot of councils across South Wales, particularly anyway. There's not many others that are sort of building houses to that standard, so it is good to see, and it's a credit really to the guys putting the tenders together, that contractors and the specifications have been built to a new build houses have been built to that standard. So it's pretty pleasing to see, to be fair. So if you do get an opportunity, there are some new build schemes around Swansea, places like Beaconsview in Clace, or there's 2 or 3 in Penlan at the minute. If you are driving past and can spare 5 or 10 minutes, it's worth sort of having a look at some of the properties being built, because it's quite modern, and it's pleasing to see, and it's a big tick in the box for Swansea as a local authority, I'd say. But yeah, it's interesting to see again what Mark and Amanda had to say on those sort of points as well. So it's been worthwhile feedback and good to hear this morning.
Okay, Mark, would you like to close?
Yeah, so I'll touch on procurement strategy first, and I'll caveat it with where possible. So where possible, we will or are asked to provide pricing for an equivalent electric vehicle over an internal combustion or hybrid vehicle. Internal combustion usually at the moment is petrol, has obviously always been diesel, but we are being guided away from diesel engines because of harmful emissions. We're going back to supplying more petrol vehicles, which was a thing of probably 15 years ago, but petrol engines emit more CO2, which is why the shift occurred 15 odd years ago to the diesel engine, because of CO2 rises and the harms to the environment that causes. So it's obviously the lesser of two evils when we're discussing diesel and petrol engines, which is why a number of manufacturers now offer hybrid, either plug-in or mild hybrid. A mild hybrid vehicle is a vehicle that has internal charging capabilities and a small battery assist that allows the vehicle to do probably up to about 15 miles on an electric motor before switching to its diesel or petrol engine. A plug-in hybrid has a larger electric motor. It requires plugging in to be charged and will allow however much range that manufacturer's battery can give it before switching on to the petrol or diesel engine. When we're talking about all electric vehicles, there are limitations, unfortunately, at the moment. So if we're talking like for like cars, under the tender process, we will always offer electric and internal combustion engine offerings. There are cost bearing issues when it comes to procuring electric vehicles. They are more expensive at the moment to build because manufacturers tend to put their production factories and facilities in place to build vehicles over a 10 or 15 year period. And only in the last 5 or so years has electric vehicle manufacturing become a real focus. So manufacturing facilities are still geared up to build vehicles with internal combustion engines. That is changing, and a huge investment by the manufacturers is required in order to change over their global assembly plants to allow electric vehicles to be built. all manufacturers now offer electric vehicles as part of their range, and there are limitations to the capabilities of those vehicles. So Rhys mentioned earlier Tesla. Tesla are probably the market leader in terms of range for passenger cars, but are obviously a premium brand vehicle. And the cost of a Tesla Model 3 compared to the cost of a Ford Focus with a 1 litre petrol engine is probably twice as much, and therefore the lease will reflect that in terms of how much that vehicle costs. Where the Tesla does outperform the Focus at the moment is in terms of residual value, and as a leasing company, the residual value has a direct effect on the rental of the vehicle, and so the gap of twice the difference in procuring alleviates itself somewhat in the lease rental of the vehicle because the resale value is higher, as we see vehicles will all become electric over the next 10 years. Now, where the limitations really lie and where the problems lie for an authority, and all authorities that I deal with, not just Swansea City Council, is that predominantly the vehicle makeup of Swansea City Council is light commercial vehicle. So panel van of sub 3.5 ton with whatever type of conversion it may be, whether it's tipper, full panel van with racking, flatbed with a cage, whatever it may be. There are few manufacturers that offer 3.5 ton panel vans as all electric vehicles, and where they do offer that type of vehicle, there are limitations to range, payload, and excessive costs associated with those vehicles. So if I can talk about range in the first instance, which isn't such an issue in the Swansea area because of the localized type of journeys the vehicles do, I would say that a 3.5 ton panel van with, let's use a tip-in body conversion as an example, will give you a range of between 100 and 150 miles, let's say. So that's realistic for use in the Swansea area and will provide a day-to-day solution as a direct comparison of a vehicle. Where that vehicle then has huge limitations is in its payload, so the amount of stuff, if you like, that can be put on board. And I would say at best a tipper converted electric vehicle will give you 350 or 400 kilos of payload. Before you put a driver in, before you put a passenger in, before they carry their tools and products to go and do the job that they're doing. So there are huge limitations. In comparison, a tip-in body converted diesel-powered 3.5 ton panel van will give you 600 to 900 kilos, depending on the chassis and tip-in body type that you're putting on. So big limitations at the moment in capabilities of the vehicles. And that's something that forms issues for all authorities, not Swansea Council as a standalone. Also then, to move up a weight class, so above 3.5 ton, the costs associated with over 3.5 ton electric commercial vehicles are astronomical in comparison to diesel powered. At the moment, let's use bin lorries, for example. We are going to have to move to all electric bin lorries in the future. At the moment, Dennis Eagle offer a very good and capable electric bin lorry. However, it's probably 6 times more expensive than a diesel powered bin lorry. Huge differences in cost and capabilities of how you charge these things and the infrastructure required. You can't plug a Dennis Eagle bin lorry into a 13 amp fuse. You're talking about rapid charging, huge investment in infrastructure, where the vehicles are charged, what the infrastructure and cabling looks like there. I've been doing some work with Cardiff Council on this. And to move away from that and into the real world of charging vehicles, the plug points that Rhys referred to earlier in the new builds are absolutely the way forward for charging vehicles for new builds. However, huge amounts of employees, whether that's corporate employees or of Swansea City Council, will live in terraced housing. We're plugging a plug point cable across a pathway to a vehicle start on a road is not a viable option for charging. And so what we're looking at here is actually advances in technology to enable charging to be done either wirelessly, like mobile phones can now, via park pads, which will be affixed to the floor outside addresses, or other methods of wirelessly charging vehicles. However, there are obviously limitations to that as well. We know, for example, that people living in terrace houses may have more than one vehicle and are allocated permit parking across a street area, not directly outside their house. So how these vehicles are charged and how all this needs to develop is a far wider conversation related to charge point infrastructure, vehicle manufacturers, and advancements in technology. Unfortunately, the governments in Europe are trying to force through zero emissions and are heavily incentivizing manufacturers to get their vehicles to zero emission as quickly as they can. However, like I said, the infrastructure and the charging capability and type of the vehicle is where I see the real problems lying in the future. A vehicle manufacturer can provide you with a car that'll do 300 miles on an electric motor, no problem at all. But if you live in a terrace house, how do you take that home? How do you plug that into charge? How do you get the fuel needed into that vehicle safely without creating other issues to security of your house and to people who have access over a pathway? Those issues are larger and greater and form part of a further conversation.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think everybody has appreciated what you've just told us, because it is, as I opened a lot of eyes, especially about the bin lorries and and the commercial vehicles, because I wasn't aware of that, and I'm pretty sure many other people would. Mike, I'll
Chris,
come back to you.
just to touch one more point on that, in my opinion, again, there was a lot of funding available via Europe for infrastructure and vehicles, which I believe the Welsh Government didn't take full advantage of. That's, you know, outside again of this procurement meeting, but I know of another, well, Scotland, for example, had huge swathes of money through Europe for charging infrastructure and for vehicles, and incentivizing authorities to go greener. And for whatever reason, I haven't seen that money and those grants available to Welsh authorities. Whether that's because the Welsh Government didn't apply, weren't successful, whatever, that's above, you know, where I sit. But I know I fund huge amounts of vehicles via assisted funding into Scotland.
I'm afraid, Mark, it's above our pay grade, that, so we'll,
Yes.
but it is nice to know. Mike, I've got Chris Williams who had his hand up. Can I ask Chris to come in and then come back to you?
Yeah, no problem. It's just that I just wanted to read the point what we just discussed in chat, that's all, about the vehicles. Are you happy for me to put it to Mark? What I want,
yes, go on, then I'll come back to Chris Williams.
yeah, what I wanted to know, Mark, you talk about the big lorries, like refuse vehicles, big lorries. How many hours would you say that these would have to be charged up, you know, for them to be back operational for the following day?
The Dennis Eagle is rapid charge only, so via a higher ampage charging point, and can be charged to full in 6 hours. So it's fully capable and operational the next day, if you like. They can rapid charge in a shorter time to 80% is about 2.5 to 3 hours, but fully charged to 100% is about 6 hours at the moment. And that will come down. That will come down. Mike, technology and advancements in technology is, you know, fairly rapid in charging capabilities and the battery types. Just to touch on that one, Mike, and not to go on too much, in my opinion, there are limitations to electric vehicles that we will hit in the future, and therefore additional advancements in technology over things around things like hydrogen fuel cells, which I believe are the halo product that we'll get towards, are where we will need to, because like with your mobile phone, the same battery technology is deployed within a car, and what we're going to get to in 15 or 20 years is huge amounts of batteries for landfill.
Okay, thanks,
Which
Mark.
absolutely is the right environmental way to move forward.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Chris Williams.
Thank you. My point was slightly different than the ones we've been discussing. Just as we get towards the end of this meeting, it'd be useful for me if people wouldn't mind in some of the issues raised. For example, the issue Christopher was raising between use of a direct tender process and a framework. If you wouldn't mind being able to put that perhaps in writing to Michelle, exactly which contract versus which contract, so I know exactly what I'm looking at in terms of the responses. But also I think Amanda raised some interesting points. And I think you said that certain questions we were asking were not particularly relevant to the procurements in question. I'd be interested to know, exactly which tenders, which questions we're talking about. The point about some things being put out to grant, some things being procured. Again, exactly which things are we looking at there, so we can understand that. And I think there was a point around checks where we were asking for certain checks on suppliers, which maybe weren't relevant. Again, exactly which tenders, which checks, just as much data as possible, so I can properly investigate and use this forum to learn from all the comments that have been made. The only point I'd make on the social care, agenda is we rarely, if ever, in my experience, go out on just price of a contract. There's always what you could term a quality element to it, an understanding of how a partner would meet the specification. Because I think, Amanda, you made a point around, because we were going out to procurement, we were too focused on the value for money aspect. We I think, make a lot of care not to be, as I say, I would say it's almost unheard of in that sector to go out 100% say on a price-based solution. But again, I'm just keen to get some more data, if that's possible, please, Councillor Holly, so I can, further investigate these and better understand and learn from them. Thanks.
Not at all. I'll now close the well, what I'll do is I'll ask if any of the businesses that have been on to the call today would like to add something in or put something into writing into Michelle with regards to what has been said. We'd be more than delighted to have it for evidence for the future. I'm going to close the formal part of the meeting now.
Sorry, Councillor Holly, I think Amanda Carr wanted to say something. Did you want to come back, Amanda?
Oh, sorry, Amanda.
On what was said by
sorry.
Chris.
Yeah, sorry. It was just to clarify. I was actually trying to say that it was good that it wasn't all value for money, but that was really important that other factors were brought in on services to people other than value for money. But I think the bit that I probably was where I fell out of the call was the other bit linked to that was about third sector organisations feeling like, because third sector organisations are not for profit organisations, so when they tender for something there is no profit in it for them to start with, therefore the value for money thing is really important to those organisations because there is no profit margin, and so when a contract value is lower perhaps than their previous SLA value, it feels like, although they're not being scored on value for money, it feels like the price is being driven down to them and there is no profit in there in the first place. Thanks.
Okay. Now then, we've got if you would all like to stay on the call for one more minute, we have a work programme which is the next item on the agenda, which is on agenda 7, as long as members are happy with the work programme, because the next meeting is the 10th of November. If members are all happy with that, okay. Right, now then, if I can ask Michelle to stop recording.
We'll do now.